Welcome to the Braver Angels debate. My name is Cynthia O'Brien. I'm in beautiful Gresham, Oregon, and I will be your chair this evening. We want this to be the place where you can have a better conversation on this topic than you would have anywhere else. Remember that a Braver Angels debate is not like a high school debate competition where you crush the opposition with data. It's not a candidates debate. It's a collective search for truth. So we're trying to share what we really do think. And the number one rule is to say what you believe. So I've been chairing national debates for 4 years, and this is absolutely true. We can talk about anything. Um, we can talk about hard things, no matter how controversial, if we do it in the right spirit. And we pretty much only debate hard topics, and that's what makes it amazing. So we're going to post up the Braver Angels Way. And Emily, who's going to read that for us?
Um, was it Elizabeth?
Elizabeth, could you read this for us?
The Braver Angels Way. We state our views freely and fully without fear. We treat people who disagree with us with honesty, dignity, and respect. We welcome opportunities to engage those with whom we disagree. We believe all of us have blind spots and none of us are not worth talking to. We seek to disagree accurately, avoiding exaggeration and stereotypes. We look for common ground where it exists and, if possible, find ways to work together. We believe that in disagreements, both sides share and learn. In Braver Angels, neither side is teaching the other or giving feedback on how to think or say things differently.
Thank you. The resolution that we are debating tonight is resolved. The rural-urban divide in Oregon is insurmountable. That's the statement that we are debating. So we want to know, do you agree with that the divide is insurmountable? Or do you disagree and think that we can work across that divide? Or do you have mixed feelings? Again, everyone in the room is welcome to speak. So with that, I call this debate to order. To speak in favor of the resolution, the first person is Matt McCaw. Matt, you can unmute and you have 4 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. We're really excited. My name is Matt McCaw. I'm the executive director of the Greater Idaho Movement. And if people haven't heard of us or don't know what we are, we're a grassroots organization in Eastern Oregon that's seeking to move the border between Idaho and Oregon westward so that counties in Eastern Oregon can get their state level governance from Idaho. So this debate topic is timely, and it's the reason why our movement exists, is because there is an urban rural divide in our state, and it's not just in Oregon, it's across the country. And that urban rural divide is insurmountable in the sense of trying to create policy that's a one size fits all for both sides. And so if you go down the line on just about any topic that we vote on, abortion or minimum wage or transgenderism or gun rights or you name it, you pick a topic. The people in urban centers tend to vote one way on those topics, and the people in rural areas tend to vote the opposite way. And that's exactly what happens in the state of Oregon, is that we have our urban center in kind of Multnomah County, the metro area, and they have a tendency to vote very heavily one direction. And then in our rural counties out in Eastern Oregon, we tend to vote the opposite, but still heavily in the opposite direction. So what you have is you have two separate cultures that have fundamentally different views, outlooks on the world, fundamentally want different things for their communities. And so if one of those two groups is trying to force their way of life, their policy, their culture on the other, it leads to conflict, it leads to political tension. And we see that in our state, and we've seen it in our state for a very long time. So just as an example, and I will say too, people ask me sometimes, well, why now? Why do we feel like we're so polarized and things are so, why do you want to move the border now? There's always been an urban rural divide, which is true, there has. but there are more topics now that are more polarizing. And what we're finding and what we're seeing is that each side of each issue is less tolerating of living under the other side's what their policy would be. So here's a quick example. In Oregon, we had Measure 114, which was a gun control measure, and it was it put some controls on gun ownership and gun registration and things. It was a policy that urban voters supported. It was something they felt they needed to make their communities safe. Voted heavily in Multnomah County for. Our rural counties feel just the opposite on the gun issue. To our rural communities, having guns is their way they keep their families safe. These are huge counties with few people and not a lot of police presence. So it's a safety issue for both sets of people, and they feel polar opposite on these issues. So what happened in Oregon is we had our urban centers pass this measure. It gets forced onto our rural communities, causes massive political tension. And we see this with more and more issues all the time. Abortion is one of these issues. Transgenderism is one of these issues. COVID policy was one of these issues where the west side of the state kind of dictated policy that the east side of the state simply could not tolerate. So, as far as the larger question, is the divide insurmountable? It is, because the two groups of people want fundamentally different things for their communities. But there's a second part of the question in this debate tonight, and is, can you accommodate those things? And that answer to that is also yes. And we believe you can accommodate the differences, but you have to acknowledge that there's differences, and you have to allow those people to have policy in government that they actually want, that makes sense for their communities.
All right, thank you. Hands for our speaker, and we will take one or two questions. If you have a question for this speaker, raise your Zoom hand. Allison, would you like to unmute and ask your question to me, Madam Chair?
Hello, everyone, and Madam Chair. I would like to ask the previous, ask the previous speaker, how exactly did they arrive at the proposed border going through Deschutes County? It seems a little creative. I just would like to know more of the backstory.
All right, about a minute to answer.
Yeah, it's real simple. Our movement is a self-determination movement. We're trying to solve problems, not create more problems by dragging voters into a type of governance that they don't want. So our proposal is just that. It's a proposal. It's an imaginary line. We look at the way that people vote. And, Idaho is a very red state and Oregon's a very blue state. So areas that vote very red, like Eastern Oregon counties and the rural parts of Deschutes County, it's an imaginary line. It can go wherever it makes sense to go. It's a political tool we can use to group similar peoples. And so that's how that determination was made. But just quickly, Madam Chair, we are not the ones that will decide where that border will go eventually. That's something that the two state legislatures will sit down and our elected leaders will decide that.
Thank you. Tim Earl, would you like to unmute and ask a question to me?
Thank you. So, enjoyed listening to what you have to say. Just a little background in Washington.
Nope, I just want a question. Just a question, please.
Okay, but the question is about ag forestry like we have in Washington. Is there anything in Oregon that does the same things that ag forestry in Washington does? It's an education foundation. That's my question. Is there anything like that in Oregon? A leadership program?
Okay. Matt, would you like to respond?
Madam Chair, I'm unaware of that program. I'm not familiar with that. And so I don't think I can answer that.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question then from Peter.
Okay, I want to ask you, do you think you have the right to make me move to Idaho?
I'm sorry, no, ask to the chair, please. Madam Chair.
Oh, Madam
Yes.
Chair?
Yes, you ask it to me. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm saying to you, do you have the right to make me move to Idaho when I don't want to go? I live in Eastern Oregon.
All right. Does the person have the right to make you move to Eastern Oregon? Okay. Matt?
Move to Idaho. I live in Eastern Oregon, move to Idaho.
So I would answer that by saying that the majority of people that live in Eastern Oregon would prefer Idaho governance, and we've seen that because we've gone to voters directly. And so when we're talking about moving Eastern Oregon counties into Idaho governance, that's because the vast majority of people in Eastern Oregon would prefer Idaho governance. And we know that because we've gone and asked them directly. So right now, the people in Eastern Oregon are stuck getting government and policy that they don't want, that they don't vote for, and doesn't match our community's values. We could use the peaceful political tools that we have to get those people better government. And that's the whole idea behind our movement.
And with that, speaker is thanked. Hands for our speaker and the questioners. We will now hear a speech in the negative, and that will be from Alice. Alice, you can unmute and you have up to 4 minutes. Sorry, that's me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name's Alice Massey. I live in Pendleton, Oregon, and I believe it is possible to bridge the urban-rural divide in Oregon because I have seen firsthand how advocacy and good communication can bring about change to benefit people in rural areas. I have worked for the past 37 years in the disability services field. Supporting people with disabilities has been of lifelong importance to me. One of my younger sisters experiences intellectual disability, so this work is very near and dear to my heart. Throughout my career in disability services, I've had many occasions to be frustrated over having to follow certain state rules or policies that simply didn't fit for the people with disabilities whom I serve throughout rural Eastern Oregon. And because of that poor fit, some policies and rules which had been developed in good faith by good people in Salem, hoping to help people with disabilities, ended up actually becoming obstacles. When these situations occurred, I joined with like-minded colleagues and people we served, and we found ways to effectively communicate our needs to Salem and manifest needed changes. Our advocacy efforts took many forms. We often worked to amplify the voices of folks in our rural areas who experience disability to share their personal stories about the burdens they felt from having to follow policies that just didn't fit well for them. We frequently gathered and submitted data and statistics to illustrate the differences in the resources available to rural East Oregonians versus those in Western Oregon. For example, most recently, when a proposed rollout of a web-based resource for people with disabilities was approaching, I was able to submit data to inform authorities that only 30% of the 800 plus individuals I was serving had reliable internet and technology access, and thus they would have a far less chance of being helped by the new resource being proposed. On multiple occasions, colleagues and I from throughout 13 counties in Eastern Oregon wrote group letters to leaders in Salem proposing viable alternatives and solutions to the problems we were describing. We also had to learn to step up into leadership positions and serve on committees and work groups and have a seat at the tables where policies were being developed in Salem. Over my long career in this work, I've seen these efforts come to fruition many times, even as recently as 3 weeks ago, when a renewal of a state contract for services included a revision that I'd been requesting for several years. Previous contracts had not fully paid for staff travel time when serving clients, and I had submitted data illustrating how disproportionately this affected my team, who serves 16 counties and span 55,000 square miles, over 50% of the geography of our state. The new contract includes that revision that pays for our travel time, which enables us to now continue this work that is so important to us and the people we serve. So even though it sometimes feels like maybe nobody's listening, leadership in Salem did consider our perspectives, and sometimes change happens for the better. Admittedly, it's not always perfect, and it sometimes feels exasperating and exhausting to have to continually advocate, but change is possible, and it happens because of our efforts. So it's from my personal experience, having been part of efforts bridging Oregon's urban-rural divide, at least in disability services, that I know it is possible. I yield the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker. And I love it when the speakers time themselves and I don't have to interrupt them. I appreciate that. I'll take a couple of questions for this speaker. And the way that we do it is you ask a question about the person that just spoke, not people further back. So Daniel, would you like to unmute and ask your question to me, Madam Chair?
Yeah, before I start, beautiful speech, whoever just gave it. But one quick question I do have. So you were the person giving the speech was talking about advocacy or spreading information about people with disabilities. But my question is that exclusive to Oregon? Can we not do that in Idaho as well?
Okay, go ahead. About a minute to respond.
Thank you for the question. Yes, I think living anywhere, one can advocate for one's needs.
All right. Does anyone else have a question? Okay, Elizabeth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would the previous speaker have an example where advocacy did not work?
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, without getting into the weeds of a lot of specifics about the work that I do, yes, there are times when advocacy did not work. Sometimes there are still now policies in place that put rural folks at a disadvantage, and we continue to advocate for what those are. But I feel confident in doing so, knowing that they're having seen a change affected, that I can continue to advocate in good faith and assume good intent in Salem.
All right. And with that, the speaker is thanked. All right. This is a first. I have never, ever, ever seen no one else lined up to speak on one side. But we have 3 people lined up to speak against the resolution. But right now, sorry, my own timer. But I don't have anybody that wants to speak in the affirmative. So I will take just a raised Zoom hand for someone who would like to make a speech in the affirmative, which is resolved the rural-urban divide in Oregon is insurmountable. Allison, you want to try for that? Do you want to make a speech? You have to unmute to tell me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have nothing
Okay.
prepared.
That's okay. Some of the best speeches are not prepared.
So I'm just going to speak purely from personal experience.
Okay. You have up to 4 minutes, and
Oh.
but
You'll
you
probably
don't
have to just do this or something, which is
you don't have to
fine.
use all that time. So go ahead.
Okay. Hopefully I won't. So the reason I asked the original speaker the question about the line through Deschutes County, and I was really glad to hear that it went by the actual voting of the neighborhoods per se for Deschutes, because I am one of those people. I live out in Alfalfa, and I've been here 10 years. Loved Oregon, came from California. Loved Oregon for the fact that it always seemed like kind of a live and let live state and stuff like that. So I'm not going to go off on like what I see, but they got the line just right. That's all I want to say, because it's all cowgirls and cows out here. And it's palpable. It's become palpable. When the first 5 years, it wasn't even like a thing. And we ran into Bend, run over to Prineville, run over. I've always had the ranchy side in me. I don't know. It's like I don't want it to be taken away from the people that really, their lifestyle and their. I feel for those that have been here for generations of the lifestyle. I'm like a wannabe, obviously, but I just have to commend our original speaker on the whole movement, and they got the boundary right. I think on our street, I'm literally like a quarter mile. I would be in the greater Idaho, which is fine with me because I don't have kids, and a lot of the issues don't affect me. I do have my, opinions either way, but it just seems like I just want everyone to feel like they get what they need, and I appreciated hearing from the second speaker about the advocacy, and it's just sad that you shouldn't have to go through all that work, right? Just be like people should get it, should be there. I don't know. Just it does seem so different culturally, I guess. So good luck with that. I don't know. I'm on board with it. And I don't know, it made me feel bad in some other forums about the topic that you get these are like Facebook groups and things like that, and local from Bend area, and we'll move. And so that's kind of, I'm curious to hear someone, that feels that way, is the because I'm not a native Oregonian, so I feel kind of, I'm not even qualified to talk to this really. But I thought since I live right on the border, I'm kind of representative of the person that I've always liked to straddle divides. So in your questionnaire, I'm, in the middle. Like maybe a few months ago, I kind of I grew up leaning left and a little lean right. I don't know about that. So that's me, straddler. But I want the people that, because I do see, I've watched all the things about it. I see very disappointed and sad stories about just the disconnect. So, but I'd be curious to hear from people up in Portland and how they feel about us, people that like our rural ways or whatever.
Okay.
Like we want to keep our guns or whatever, that sort of thing. You know what I mean?
All right.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker, extemporaneous. Way to go. I'll take a question or two for this speaker. If someone has a question, just raise your Zoom hand. If not, it is cool because we can move on. With that, the speaker is thanked. Moving to a speech in the negative, Susan Jane Brown, we would like to hear from you. Can you unmute? You have up to 4 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity. My name is Susan Jane Brown. I am an attorney. I'm an environmental attorney, and I work for an organization called Silvix Resources, which is a nonprofit environmental law firm that works on federal forest law and policy issues. So I am a litigator. I represent conservation organizations in federal court, typically challenging federal timber sales, mostly Forest Service timber sales, but also Bureau of Land Management. So I'm a certified tree hugger. I usually spend most of my time on the west side of the Cascades in Portland. And I have been practicing law for almost 25 years. And I'm a pretty good attorney. I'm good at what I do. And over my career, I've done a lot of work in federal court early on in my career, first probably 10 or 15 years of my career. Spent a lot of time suing the Forest Service over federal timber sales on federal public lands on the east side and the west side of the Cascades here in Oregon, also California and Washington and elsewhere in the West. And I was really happy with that. I was good at what I did. I got results. I protected a lot of forests as a result of my work. But I also came to realize by working with some county commissioners in Eastern Oregon and Grant County that my litigation, which was very successful, also had a lot of unintended consequences, particularly in rural communities where that timber harvest happened and where that timber was processed. And I learned that by listening. I was invited to come out to Grant County from Portland, so making the trek across the Cascades out to Eastern Oregon, very conservative community, very rural community, not at all like Portland. And to talk to folks who live there, to hear from them about how the litigation work that I was doing was having unintended consequences on that rural community. We started talking. those conversations were extremely difficult. As many of you know, in Oregon, we like to fight about trees. We like to fight about forest management and land management. And those are a lot of really difficult conversations to have. They're very emotional. People feel very passionately about their forests and their land. And having those conversations when the work that I was doing was having this demonstrable adverse effect on these communities, because I was good at what I did, and I shut down the timber sale program on the Malheur National Forest in Eastern Oregon. And that really had adverse impacts on that community. People were put out of work, and that was harmful. But by having conversations in the field with people from that place who were brave and courageous and shared their story with me about how my work was having an impact on their community, I could hear their perspectives and I could come to understand where they were coming from. And from me, they also heard about why I thought the forest was needed protection and needed saving from those evil, loggers in the woods, right? So we had a lot of really difficult conversations. There was a lot of baggage involved, a lot of history in land management issues. But over time and over many beers and many dinners, a lot of food was shared. We actually started to hear a little different story coming from community members and from people like me who wanted to save the forest. And what we were starting to learn from each other was that we had very similar concerns. We all care about the forest. We all care about family. We all care about wanting a beautiful place to recreate. So we had common ground and we had common interest. We just had different ways of looking at that issue. And by sitting down, sharing a meal together, talking about, hey, my kid plays soccer. You coach, softball in this community. Hey, we have something in common here, right? And it's not just about trees. It's about other things as well. And when you have those kinds of conversations, you really do start to look at each other as people and not as positions, right?
About time.
And so over the past 21 years, we've been able to work together to reach across that urban-rural divide and do some good things for the forest and do some really good things for that community. So I do think that the urban-rural divide is surmountable. It just takes time, and you got to be willing to listen.
Thank you. Thank you. Hands for our speaker. Are there questions for the speaker? Samantha, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Madam Speaker, I would like to know from this speaker if there were particular solutions to the differences, the damage that the rural areas felt had befallen on them by decisions made. Was there support in the governance of Oregon to try and respond to those concerns?
Okay.
Specifically, can you think of any specific?
Yeah, specific examples. About
Sure.
1 minute.
Yep, you ready for me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks for that question. Yes, the work that I was referring to is called Forest Collaboration, and it actually started here in the West. It is sort of a social movement where you actually sit down and see if you can talk about forest management and come to agreement around what should be done out there. And over the years, there have been a number of state and federal and a lot of non-governmental programs and funding to encourage that kind of civil dialogue and discourse. So the Forest Service has funding and has a program. I get it wrong, but it's the Community Capacity CCLS, Community Capacity Landscape Scale Program, which provides funding for forest collaboratives to actually get together, nascent forest collaboratives to get together and explore common ground. There are federal programs and federal investment as well that facilitate those kinds of conversations. So yes, there's definitely support out there for it. There's not as much money as I would like to see invested in those kinds of conversations, but yes, there are programs and there are support for that kind of stuff out there.
Thank you. Just a follow-up from the chair. Could you give an example of not just conversations programs, but actually, if was there any action that you felt you could do that you did to repair damage that was done to those communities? Just any like
Yeah,
one example, maybe.
yeah. Beyond sort of listening, and showing up and acting with your actions in a way that that works to address those old wounds. Several years ago, about a decade ago, the last mill in Grant County, John Day, announced that it was going to close because it didn't have a sustainable supply of wood product, of raw product to run through the mill. So it was going to close. And other than the Forest Service, that mill provided most of the education employment in that community. My partners and I came together, and including folks in the timber industry, the Forest Service, conservation community, elected officials, we came together and said, look, we can't allow this to happen. We can't allow this mill to close. And so we came up with a plan, and everybody was going to do their part. The Forest Service was going to put together a long-term stewardship contract that would provide a predictable supply of raw product to the mill. We had our senators, Wyden and Merkley, who were able to provide additional funding to the Forest Service to plan the work on the ground to feed the mill. So we all had our part. We all had our part to play. And we were able to save the mill. And by saving the mill, we definitely repaired a lot of those skeptical relationships. And we did change a lot of hearts and minds. We got a long way to go for sure, but we showed by our actions that we agreed that a change needed to be made and a repair needed to be made.
Okay.
And we couldn't do that alone.
Yeah.
We had to do it together as a team.
Thank you. So I know there are a lot of questions, but I'm going to say that the speaker is thanked. Hands for the speaker, because I'm going to move on to our next speaker in the affirmative, who is Sandy Gilson. Sandy, you can unmute, and you have up to 4 minutes.
Hello, I am Sandy Gilson, and I'm Vice President of Greater Idaho. The policies coming out of Salem and Portland are devastating. I am in Grant County. The devastation here in Grant County from the spotted owl on is tremendous. We used to have 7 mills in this town. We now have 1. The population here has been down to 1/4 what it used to be because of rules that and regulations that just devastated our economies. Now we're looking at taxations that are happening to our businesses that are devastating our businesses. The consumer activity tax, which is a gross tax on income for businesses, that's their gross dollar, not their net. The hidden taxes that we're seeing, such as buying a new car, renting equipment, has a tax on it now. And there's just tax after tax after tax coming in, and it is devastating our businesses to where it is becoming almost unsustainable to continue to operate in Eastern Oregon. The other rules that are coming up are overtime rules and limiting hours for farm workers. These are old systems and set up to where a farmer compensated in other ways than necessarily hourly pay, as in housing and food and other things. And all these systems are being broke down by the government in Oregon, and not allowing us to live the way we want to live in the culture that we choose to live. You know, people can say it's not fair or anything, but these are chosen ways that we choose to live. When we move out to Eastern Oregon, and I've been raised out in Eastern Oregon, I was raised actually in Lake County. We made the choice to be farm families or ranch families, or to live and be loggers and other things. So we took on the responsibility and the limits that those meant. the long hours and the time commitments. And now the rules are changing to where it is no longer sustainable to hold these businesses together. And that is one of the biggest problems that I have with Oregon at this time. The taxing of our gross income, the taxing of every little thing that seems to be happening. I mean, I went to rent a wood splitter the other day and was told that I have to pay a tax on renting that wood splitter now that this is a new tax in Oregon. And it just seems nonstop, the taxation without representation. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice, allergy season. But here in Eastern Oregon, we used to have 2 or 3 pharmacies per town. The cat tax has closed everything but one, and that one is barely holding on per county. And we're talking about pharmacies that are hundreds of miles apart. And if we lose the pharmacy in town, it's hundreds of miles to go to another one. And these are all taxation issues and wage increases and other things that are making livability out here unsustainable. Thank you.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker. I will take 1 or 2 questions. Daniel, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Despite the differences between East and West Oregon, does the movement feel any, I guess, connection to conservatives living in the main cities of the West?
Okay.
And by what I mean by that truly is, does the movement feel, I guess, in a way guilty for leaving those Republicans or conservatives behind who have similar ideas and values to Eastern Oregon?
Okay.
You know, I have been very vocal in the ORP and other events, and that is one of the things that I get confronted with all the time by the Republicans over on the West Side. And as much as we'd like to save everyone, we need to concentrate on those that we can and save the areas that we can and make a reasonably clean break and then maybe work on something more. At this time, we are choosing to focus on Eastern Oregon. But we do think and do feel for any conservative or those that do not feel that they align with this government.
Okay, I'll take 1 more question.
Thank you.
Roger Nesbitt, you can unmute and ask your question to the chair.
Yeah, the question I have is, what is the feeling by the Greater Oregon or Greater Idaho about this political situation in Idaho? I used to live in Boise many years ago, and even then it was pretty dominated by the urban area of Boise, and I'm sure that's grown even more because Boise's population is increasing.
Okay.
Perhaps I'm wondering, why is that moving the border is necessarily going to be a solution for this problem about having urban dominated politicians understand rural problems?
About 1 minute to answer, Sandy.
Boise is approximately 500,000 people. What we're looking to move in the Greater Idaho is another 400,000 people, which would offset it. Boise is growing. Boise area is expanding. But one thing that I've been watching in the Idaho news is the number of people moving into Boise and how they are registering to vote. 68% of those moving into Idaho are registering Republican or conservative, 12% registering Democratic, and the remainder registering independent. They are not seeing an overwhelming increase in Democratic demographics. They are seeing people that are conservatives wanting to go to a conservative state and live there. And that Boise isn't as big as Portland. Portland metro area is 2.6 million. And there's no way to counterbalance that with Eastern Oregon, to where if we can counterbalance it in Idaho with rural Idaho, and Boise not being over 1 million people yet.
Thank you.
So there is that time lag that we have to continue to be more conservative in Idaho.
Thank you. And with that, the speaker is thanked. For a speech in the negative, I'm going to call on Helen Christians. Helen, would you like to unmute? And you have up to 4 minutes.
Hi, thank you. I really have been enjoying this program and this debate. So thank you for your leadership and thank the speakers for their insight. I live in Portland and I'm in a kind of an unusual district, federal district. Lori Chavez Deemer is my District 5. Even though I live in Portland, the District 5, Federal District 5, she's goes from Portland all the way to Bend. So I'm in, even though I live in Portland, I'm in an Eastern district, primarily Eastern district, and Lori is a Republican. She has been very responsive, and I have enjoyed communicating with her office, and I feel that she's listened to me when I've sent a message, so I appreciate that. So I feel real strongly that we can work together, urban and rural, by communicating, but we got to talk. I had to talk to her. I haven't spoken to her personally, but I have gotten emails from her and gotten good response from her office. And even though I'm a Democrat, I may vote for her in the fall. I'm not sure just yet what I'm going to do, but she's been a good representative for me. I do want to share an experience I had that I think the urban centers of Oregon desperately need the rural values that Eastern Oregon portrays. I went out to John Day a year ago, and they have a state heritage site called they call it the Chinese Pharmacy. And it's a great place. If no one's ever visited, I highly recommend it. The key here is this pharmacy, Chinese pharmacy, the building, the owner had gotten sick in the late 40s. And he left the office for the pharmacy for the last night, and never returned due to illness. And he was a single man because he was Chinese and couldn't marry in this country, or even become a citizen, even though he was very generous to Oregon. But the city of John Day inherited this site, all this land that he had, and it included the pharmacy. And they built a park, and there was a swimming pool there. But for 30 years, the pharmacy was never vandalized, was never broken in. There was a swimming pool on the site. There was tennis courts on the site. There were many children on the site. And that pharmacy was never vandalized. It was never broken into for 30 years. There was no graffiti. I just was amazed by this, that for 30 years, the citizens of John Day did not touch. They didn't do anything. They just left the building alone like they promised they would. Well, 30 years later, they realized they have a wonderful site and they opened it as a heritage site. The little temple was still there. The thousands of dollars of whiskey that was in the basement was still there.
Okay, and wrapping up. Helen,
Okay, so what I'm saying is, I live with graffiti here in Portland. I think that Oregon needs the Eastern people of Eastern Oregon and their values to help us help our city. So thank you.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker.
Yeah.
Is there a question for this speaker? Ingrid, you can unmute, ask your question to the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask the speaker, she made a great point about the potential benefit to urban learning from the rural colleagues, but if the rural communities feel like they are being crushed and can't survive, how can it be a mutual benefit? Does she see a way for that?
Yeah,
About a minute
yes.
to answer.
Yeah, yes. I believe because I mean, an example for me would be the school systems in the state of Oregon. Each child gets funds rather than each district. Oregon has done a really good job to make sure the rural schools have adequate funding. And so would be an example of something that I think they're trying to make things better for the rural districts. It's coming together and communicating. We're so separate, and encouraging people to just, like we're doing today, recognize each other's strengths.
All right. I'll take one more question for this speaker. Arthur, would you like to unmute and ask your question to the chair? Arthur, go ahead and unmute.
There we go.
There you go.
There we go.
Great. Go ahead and ask your question to me. Yeah.
I apologize for that. I'm still learning this stuff.
Cool.
And you're here in Baker County, Oregon, which is the eastern, as east as you can get in Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
In dealing with the West, I have been in West in the Portland area and in Coos County areas as well. But I'm looking more at the issue instead of this Oregon moving of the border and stuff, the urban rural divide, which way back when I was living in Eugene, we were talking about bridging the gap of the urban rural gap. So I'm asking the question, in your trip when you came from Portland to John Day or in the Canyon City area, the difference in the difference in the actual communities, do you see any way of communicating that difference to the Portland, to the metropolitan areas through either educational system or political system, or how do you see a way of communicating that?
Right. Yeah, about a minute to answer.
And I think strongly the most Portland, I'm taking Portland, is a city of pretty young people compared to some of the East Coast cities that New York City and Buffalo and things like that. But I think tourism, the rural area is so beautiful, and I think getting people to visit just the John Day fossil beds, the red bluffs of the John Day area. It's just they're taking care of it, but it just knowing that it's there, that it's worth coming to see, and how to do it. There's not a lot of restaurants, there's not a lot of places to stay, but advertising how to be able to come and visit, getting a connection through tourism. That would be, what I would think.
Okay, and with that, the speaker is thanked. All right, so we are at a midpoint in the debate, and in a moment we are going to go into speeches again. A question came up in the chat, how do you get in line to speak? And that is that you send a chat to your WIP. So if your first name starts with K through R, you would chat to WIP Darren, and they're at the top of your participant list. Send a chat, let them know if you were for the resolution or against the resolution. And we're still at 4-minute speeches, but I think after the break we'll go to 3-minute speeches, so just a little bit more to the point and try to get everybody in. At this point, the speakers, I have one speaker in the affirmative lined up and 1, 2, 3 in the negative, so that's where that is at right now. So I want you to go ahead and stretch, and while we are just stretching a little bit, I want to introduce Elizabeth Christensen and Steve Radcliffe, and they are the co-chairs of a special initiative that we have in Oregon, which is the Braver Angels Oregon Rural Urban Project. And they are going to address us for a couple of minutes. So Elizabeth.
Thank you all for joining us at this landmark event. The Oregon Rural Urban Project would be nothing without you, the passionate and caring participants. Thank you also to the Northwest Willamette Valley Alliance for hosting this debate and for the whole debate team for making this run so smoothly. Can we thank our debate team?
Yay.
The current divisions between rural and urban Oregonians pose a serious challenge to everyone's sense of participating in a fair and respectful political process. Across the different lifestyles and livelihoods, we, as rural and urban citizens, do not fully understand each other. So the Oregon Rural Urban Project was created to bring ordinary, everyday Oregonians together to talk about the divide and offer constructive suggestions from both the urban and rural perspectives. Using the Braver Angels methodology to facilitate conversations across the divide that will create mutual respect and understanding, we want to empower citizens and leaders to engage in collaborative problem solving, yielding concrete, measurable outcomes that improve the lives of all Oregonians. We want to improve the policy-making process in Oregon to ensure effective participation by all Oregonians. So our project, the Oregon Rural Urban Project, has two parts. This first part is this debate. It is an opportunity to discuss the divisions that separate us. By starting our work with such a broad discussion, we hope to bring the widest possible range of perspectives and ideas forward. These ideas must, of necessity, come from you, and we sincerely thank you for participating. We are looking for the issues that separate us, your experiences with the way things are, and your thoughts about what brought us to the current state of affairs. Every voice matters here. Every person has something important to contribute. We are listening and will make a written report of everything discussed here available to all of you as soon as possible. So please keep an eye out for it. Steve.
In part two, we plan to offer a series of in-person workshops, one in each county throughout the state, addressing the issues identified here tonight, as well as concerns specific to each county. Prior to each workshop, we will hold preliminary conversations so that we can learn which issues are of greatest concern to the folks coming to the workshop. It may be possible to invite people from the other, whatever the other is, with an interest in or knowledge of the issues in question. These workshops will provide an opportunity for rural and urban Oregonians to look for common ground. As always, Braver Angels events are not intended to change anyone's opinion. Our goal is to help participants respectfully clarify and exchange views, including their different life stories and values. Workshop participants will be tasked with developing mutually agreed upon suggestions for bridging the divide and addressing the particular concerns that are raised. Again, following the workshop series, we will prepare a written report combining all the suggestions that were supported by both rural and urban Oregonians. Participants in this debate and the workshop will receive copies of both of our reports. We thank you, really, we thank you for coming tonight, for speaking up, and for working with us. We look forward to engaging with each of you in the workshops as we dig deeper into each issue and learn more about each other along the way. Thanks.
Thank you both. Also, there will be a debate tomorrow night. If you just cannot get enough of this and have nothing to do tomorrow night, we have a national debate that starts at 5 o'clock, and it's actually a panel debate, which means it's not like this where anybody can speak. It's a panel of people with specific experience. And the resolution, as you can see in the chat, will be resolved: ban hormonal and surgical treatments for gender dysphoria in minors. So we call it a Coliseum style debate. The panel will speak. You all will have an opportunity to ask questions. There's a click to register if you want to click on that, and that will lead you to a sign up. All right, we are back and we are going to start in on 3-minute speeches. And I'm going to call on the first affirmative speech, which is Sue Lonnie Madsen. Sue Lonnie.
Well, I'll listen to you speak.
I
am sitting here with my mom in Spokane. I actually live in Edwall, Washington, in Eastern Washington, lifelong Eastern Washingtonian. I will affirm everything that those have that Matt and I lost her name on there, that the Greater Oregon group has said about the differences. Eastern Washington has the same complaints. And the reason I signed in to speak in the affirmative to the resolution, resolved Oregon's rural-urban divide is insurmountable, is that I'm a hopeful cynic, and on hopeful days, I think it's surmountable, but on a cynical day, when rural counties have to push and practically throw a tantrum to get listened to, when it takes years of advocacy to explain to somebody why things look different from a rural county, from a rural culture, from a difference in the available resources, on those days, it feels insurmountable. And right now, Oregon has just experienced with the Oregon Supreme Court decision upholding the Energy Facility Siting Council recommendation to override Umatilla County. Their rural Oregon is feeling that there is an agenda that is pushed out of Western Oregon, and it leaves Eastern Oregon in the same way that many Eastern Washington counties are feeling the same way. We're feeling like we're roadkill. We don't count because there's not that many people there. So what does it matter? We're just going to put stuff here and we'll just tell you what you like. And that feeling, as long as there's not a push from the urban areas, as long as the push is having to come from rural areas to say, hey, look at me, pay attention, listen to what our problems are, it is going to be an insurmountable issue. There has to be an equal amount of pressure, more than an equal amount of pressure coming out of urban areas to even begin to make a dent in that insurmountable problem. And as I'm sitting here, I'm noticing so if you see me breathing funny, I feel like it's noticeable to me anyway. It's because here's an insurmountable problem. Here's a problem of a rural area that is not going to resonate with anybody, probably in Portland. I don't know how many 67-year-old women there are in the Portland Fire Department, but I'm still in our fire department because we have few numbers. I can't retire till we recruit replacements. I got injured in training on Monday and my ribs are sore. And that's just a reality. And that isn't an odd thing. I could describe that happening to anybody in rural Eastern and Oregon or Washington, and they would understand why that's happening and why that's going on. And people in the urban areas would just be totally surprised, totally out of their realm of knowledge. And there's all those little things about life in the rural counties of Eastern Oregon that make this insurmountable until the urban areas are as interested in finding out as we are in telling them about it.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker. I would take a question or two for this speaker.
You're snowy.
Tim Chase. Tim, you can ask your question to the chair.
Hi, Sulani. First of all, just Sulani, hope you feel better soon. So to the chair, I haven't heard discussion about how this proposed redefining of what Idaho is, how that would be paid for, because there's going to be a lot of details as far as pensions and road maintenance, all kinds of things. So I'm wondering if the speaker knows anything about how the nuts and bolts of paying for that would work.
Yeah, Sue, would you like to respond to that?
Sure. That obviously there's a lot of negotiation over details. It has been done before. West Virginia split from Virginia. We have had changes like this in boundaries before. It would just have to be discussed through and the division made, just like any divorce settlement. It could be amicable or it could end up in court.
William Dalton, would you like to ask a question? You can unmute and ask to the chair.
I am wondering both in response to Sue's comments and several of the others that have spoken to feeling like the divide is insurmountable. If there has been any discussion on both the urban and rural side of trying to elect legislators, representatives who talk about their desire to bridge gaps rather than pandering to one side or the other.
All right, Sue, would you like to respond?
You know, one person's pandering is another's listening to their constituents. And I think you have to be careful about using words like that. If in the counties in Oregon that have voted to prefer to join Greater Idaho, then they are going to understandably also elect representatives that follow that same will of the people that's been expressed in the vote. How about if urban Oregonians elected more representatives that are willing to really listen to and take seriously the concerns of rural Oregonians, and start there?
Okay, with that, speaker is thanked. Hands for speaker and the questions. Our next speech will be a speech in the negative from Peter Hall. Peter, you can unmute and you have up to 3 minutes.
Okay, one thing I want to say that this urban-rural divide thing is really a conservative liberal thing, not an urban-rural. The fact there are liberals that live in rural America and there are conservatives live in urban America. And so basically that's what's going on. And what we have to understand is that urban areas and rural areas, we need each other. We must surmount this. We must get together. Rural areas depend so much upon the economic development of urban areas. I mean, when it comes to the infrastructure in rural areas, urban areas subsidize a whole lot of it. Your water system, your sewer system, your roads, all that stuff, your educational systems, everything is basically subsidized by urban areas and the wealth they create. And urban areas need rural areas because rural areas give them food and stuff and products and things that urban areas need. So we need each other. You need the wealth of urban America and rural America, and rural America, the products that they produce is needed in urban America. So the fact is we are linked, and it's going to be that way, and it needs to be that way. And the fact that they don't listen to us, I ran for the State House in 2014 as a Democrat in House District 60, Eastern Oregon. And I got a chance to speak to Tina Kotek about some issues, and one of them was about minimum wage. And I said, it's not fair for people in rural areas and small businesses to have to pay a higher minimum wage because of the high housing costs in urban Portland. And she listened, and guess what? It got done. She listened and said, yes. So we have a three-tiered system of minimum wage because they need more in urban areas and less in rural areas. And the fact is, the state does understand and respect the economic needs of rural areas. And part of the problem is we're not getting the economic input that we should be getting in rural areas. And as part of it, it's just businesses don't want to basically put a lot of infrastructure in. Some of it has to do with housing. I mean, you have to have housing and business kind of has to go together because a business doesn't build it without the housing. There's no housing without the businesses. And then, of course, there's always the problem of some people, you've got to have a welcoming community. You want economic development, you want wealth, well, you have to be a welcoming community of all people, which means rural and urban, that is liberal and conservative, have to feel welcome in your community if you expect to have good economic growth. You can't just give yourself up. It's just kind of silly to think that, I mean, to think about the liberals living in Idaho, do they feel like they're basically being represented? No, they don't. But no, they still like living there. It's just like me. I moved from Idaho to Eastern Oregon because I didn't want to live in Idaho. But now, of course, they want me to move back to Idaho. But the fact is that there are people, are liberals who love living in rural America. I call them lifestyle liberals. They love the wilderness. They love it. They want to be part of the communities. I was a city councilor here in Haines. I was on the board of the League of Oregon Cities. The fact is the state does listen to us, and it will on economic issues. But it's true, if you're talking about social conservative issues, yeah, that is a divide that is not going to be surmountable. But it really is important for you to focus on the economic issues. And the fact is that the people in urban areas understand that they need That is, the politicians understand that they need rural areas. So the fact is, it's not a matter so much, can it be surmounted? We must link urban and rural America and then make them understand that. Okay, I'm good.
Thank you. Hands for the speaker, and I will take 1 or 2 questions for the speaker. If you haven't asked a question yet, or you haven't made a speech yet, you are welcome to raise your hand and ask a question. I like to hear lots of different voices. For a question, I will call on Daniel. Daniel, you can unmute, ask your question to the chair.
Yeah, I have a quick question. So throughout the last speech, there was constant mention that rural areas need urban areas. But my question is it really going to be a problem if it's just a different state, if like provinces just move to a different state? I mean, after all, states have, I guess, agreements with each other. So would it really be a problem about the natural resources and pipelines like you mentioned throughout your speech? Like, would it be
Yeah,
a
Peter,
drastic change?
about a minute to respond. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, there is some issues, but also it's a matter of resources available. A lot of people think they moved to Idaho, but the thing is, Idaho does not have the resources that actually would be good for provide for the economic development in Eastern Oregon. So it actually we're better off economically by being by there. Yes, socially you could be part of Idaho, but still you can't just hack yourself up. By moving big chunks of land from one to the other, you're still going to have to deal with the issue. And in the economics, it's really not getting better. Taxation, yes, there might be some difference there, but you're still going to have a lot more resources available because of the wealth of urban Portland.
Okay, I'll take 1 more question from Tim Earl. Share, you can unmute and ask your question to the chair.
I was wondering if I could ask you, Peter, about perhaps your knowledge of how many cities have, what, or am I supposed to address it to the chair?
Address the chair. You're wondering if his knowledge.
Okay, sorry. So my address to you is, Madam Chair, how many cities or do people know of that have a Plan B in Oregon? And the oldest example of a Plan B that I know of in Oregon is Ashland, who had a Plan B a long time ago and built into the Shakespearean capital. So it seems like as we're listening to speakers along, there's wanting to create a new industry for tax them instead of us, or spread out the taxes. And so are people thinking that, and do they actually have a plan in place?
Yeah, about a minute to respond.
I'm not quite sure what I understand the question. Could you say it a little differently? So I don't quite understand it.
Yeah, it is. How many cities in Eastern Oregon have a different plan? Say, if the mill closes, they're gonna, become a different have a different industry. That's how I understand it.
Yeah, that's it.
There, as far as the plans go, yes, there is among the various counties that they are trying to seek for economic development. Certainly in Baker County, they're working together, trying to be collectively with other counties to get housing here and also economic development. So the fact is, there is the idea of they do understand the need to modernize. I know there has even been in John Day, there's probably been this idea that they need to bring in new businesses to do this. So they're very well aware of it in all these different counties. They're well aware of the fact that they have to change their communities. I mean, because the small farmers going away, because of the big corporate farms. Of course, you got the logging industry. And of course, years ago, they had the mining industry. So they all know that they have to adapt and bring in new businesses. And especially with the internet and the online businesses, they say they're really planning to bring in more people that can work remotely. And so a lot of them are really focusing on rural towns, are trying to focus on remote work and bringing these remote workers. And so that's kind of their plan B, is remote work and bring those people in.
Yeah.
With that, speaker is thanked. All right, hands for our speaker and our questioners. For speech in the affirmative, we're going to Marty Wild. Marty, you can unmute and you have up to 3 minutes.
Thanks. Appreciate you doing this. I'm a former state representative, and I wanted to tell a little story about something that Mark Owen and I worked on. I was a Democrat, he was a Republican. At the time, I was chairing the committee that worked on issues surrounding marijuana, liquor, gambling. And Mark came to me and said, I want to raise taxes. But I said, well, anytime a Republican wants to talk to me about raising taxes, I willing to have the conversation. He said, well, we got a problem in Ontario, biggest city in his district. And that is that people come from Idaho and they buy cannabis. It's not legal for them to do that, but if you do the maths, to account for all the marijuana that's consumed from dispensaries in Ontario, each man, woman, and child would have to consume something like $10,000 worth of marijuana. So we know they're not doing that. So it's coming from Idaho. So obviously that creates some law enforcement issues. And so he said, well, the cap on the local option tax for marijuana is 3%. And I think he wanted to raise it to 10%, but don't quote me on the exact number. And he wanted to use the money for law enforcement purposes. But, look, cities and counties, their budgets are tight and they see this as a source of revenue. That kind of additional tax was not going to force everything into the black market. And I thought it was a reasonable source of revenue. And so I started, farming the idea around and telling my folks that I thought it was a good idea. Now, it's a local option. It's not a mandate. So you can impose it or not impose it, if you want as a city. And the answer I got back is, well, the industry doesn't want to raise it. I'm like, well, what industry does want to raise it? I said, that's not good enough for me because they're not telling me that it's going to drive it into the black market or drive people out of business. They're just saying they don't want to. They said, well, we think it should be limited for the use to rehab facilities. I said, well, if you want to spend it on rehab or whatever, knock yourself out, but it's a local option tax. So why should you, largely as or urban Portlanders, tell Mark's constituents in Ontario how they should spend the tax money that's getting spent in their communities? Why do you know better than them what they need in their town? And I never did get an answer for that, but the tax didn't get anywhere. It got killed. And so to me, that was just one example of the real challenge it is, even when people are willing to reach out and work across the divide, there's a lot of telling people how they should live and what they should and shouldn't do and what they need without due consideration to their opinion on the subject. I was fortunate enough to represent both urban and rural constituents, and I always did my best. I mean, eventually you got to come down on one side or the other, but I definitely wanted to hear from people on both sides. So I wish there was more of that. Wish there was more. Thanks.
All right, hands for our speaker. I'll take a question from Melanie. Melanie, you can unmute, ask your question to the chair.
There we go. The not listening to each other. So you think it's insurmountable?
He thinks. Does he
right.
think? Yes.
To the chair, I want to know if the previous speaker can see hope for people talking to each other, because his point was that they're not talking to each other, so it's insurmountable.
Okay, about a minute to respond.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for the question. Thank you for being here, to all of you, because people who are here are interested in this. And thank you to the speaker, or to the chair, because I used to be a city club president and I know how hard it is to manage these sorts of things. I don't know that it's hopeless. I think we need a different culture than we have. And if there are three things we should change that would moderate and improve our culture in the legislature, that would be campaign finance reform, which they've started but not finished. Open primaries, because then you would have some incentive to reach across the aisle for other voters, and nonpartisan redistricting. And I would say you can Google my name and see exactly what my personal experience is with getting redistricted out, because ironically enough, I objected to gerrymandering, and so I was gerrymandered. So I think is there hope? Yes, I think our current culture doesn't work. Thanks. Sorry, too long.
Okay, and I'll take one more question from Christopher. Christopher, you can unmute, ask your question to the chair.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Nice to see Marty. My question is, how do we decide between needs to reform or improve our democratic system, which I think the speaker just addressed, and the point or the threshold where, as you argue, there are insurmountable divides that we should essentially reallocate our population into governance structures that they're more comfortable with. Thank you.
Okay, about a minute to respond.
That's a tough one. A lot of it does depend on character, I think. But I think, if you start with just listening, I did electric vehicle policy was one of my signature issues, largely because my predecessor did it. And so I kind of inherited it. And one of the big issues was, what kind of persuasion should we get to people to transfer to electric vehicles? And, I've got a lot of rural constituents, and it had to work for them, as well. So if we were going to raise, for instance, if you decided we wanted to change the constitutional limitation on raising gas taxes to support electric vehicles, that was going to impact people who drove more, i.e. my rural constituents. So that was not a great solution for me. So, I think you just have to be aware of the disparate impacts. And again, stop trying to tell other people how they should believe and what they should do, and instead respect their opinion and think about how you can accomplish the interests we all share within those inputs.
Thank you. And with that, speaker is thanked. Speaker and questioners, hands. Good job. All right, we have 4 people in line to speak, and that will probably take us to the point where we need to be. So the next person to speak will be Melanie. Melanie, you can unmute, and you have up to 3 minutes.
Right. And so when I joined this, I didn't realize that we were really looking at the greater Idaho issue. I was just looking at the general question about the urban-rural divide. Is it insurmountable? Yeah. So I think it is surmountable. So I guess I would be a no. I got a little confused about
No,
that.
you got it.
In part because of what some of the other speakers have said about they just don't hear us in the rural or the area. And I really get that. I can understand that there's less people there. I totally understand that. I used to work for the legislature 30 years ago. And at that time, and then the first speaker talked about how things are really different now. And for me, that's the key. Yeah, it doesn't have to be the way it is right now. When I first worked for the legislature, I remember Republicans and Democrats talking to each other. They went out and they drank beer together after each session. And I could see a lot of relationship building. And that's what's missing now. There's not relationship building. So I have hope because I'm a Pollyanna. I have hope because I think in the past, we were better at talking to each other. I remember when Brian Clem was a legislator and the House was 15-15. They had to work together. So another speaker earlier said, we need to find a way to get a more balanced legislature. I agree with that too. I believe there's hope for that. I think it does relate to finding a way to really listen to each other. And this is a format, this is a platform for that. So that's why I'm here. Yeah, I think that's all I really need to say. Okay,
hands for our speaker, and I will entertain a question or two for the speaker. Bruce, you haven't asked a question yet, so why don't you ask your question to the chair?
I'm just curious, Madam Chair, what the previous speaker, are there any concrete pieces of evidence or anecdotal evidence that give the previous speaker hope? Are there any concrete things that she can cite? Because a lot of the examples seemed to go in the opposite direction.
Right. Yeah, what I had mentioned earlier when we had a legislature that was 15-15, and the experience of my legislator at the time, he said, we got more work done because we talked to each other. So I'm relying on his past experience there. And then I remember, I was not involved in this at all, but this happened in Harney County. And this was right before there was that takeover of the Harney County wildlife area. But prior to that, there was this working group of people I heard that were made up of environmentalists, ranchers, this, and it was a pretty large working group of people who for years worked on some policy that talked about how this particular land would be managed. That's a memory that I have about that, and I'm going to rely on my memory. So those are two quick things I can cite off the top of my head.
Yeah, thank you. William, do you have a question? You can unmute, ask the chair. William, can you unmute, please? William, unmute, please.
There we go.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Didn't work
and
at
go ahead
first.
and ask your question to the chair.
My question through the chair to the chair would be based on what Melanie just shared with us, including recollections of a time when the Oregon legislators seemed to speak more across the aisle. My question would be, does she have any impression of why that has changed over the past, well, to quote her, say 30 years?
Okay, about 1 minute to respond.
Well, I mean, I think there's just been a whole national the whole nation seems to be going further and further apart. And as a matter of fact, one of the points I wanted to make is for our rural folk to move to Idaho, I don't think that's going to solve the bigger problem because we're still part of the United States. And all I can say is this has just been something that's been happening for the last probably 30 years.
And with that, speaker is thanked. Hands for our speaker and our questioners. Moving right along. Our next speaker will be Victor. Let's see. No, I'm going over to affirmative, to Meredith. Meredith, you will have 3 minutes. And since we're headed toward the end, I'm not going to do questions, but I am going to still give you 3 minutes. So Meredith, you can go ahead.
Well, it's just more of a statement and a thought.
Okay.
It just has always seemed to me like the only way to solve this problem, which seems unsolvable, is for people to understand. I don't understand what it's like to live in Portland. I don't understand, but I have an idea because of the news and all the things you see and hear on the news. I'm quite sure that people in the metro area don't understand what the challenges are living in rural areas. Why, for us, having guns is important and is not an issue, but I can understand why people in Portland are afraid of having guns in their area. Is there not a way that the urban areas can have their gun control and leave that us in the eastern part of the state that don't have those issues alone? And that's not the only issue. It's just one that comes to mind. There are so many things. If people understood each other's challenges to just live, make a living, and take care of yourself and your family, whether it's in Portland or whether it's in the rural areas, if we could begin to understand one another, then maybe there would be issues that could be solved. That's all.
All right, thank you. And the speaker is thanked. Hands for our speaker. Victor, you are next. You have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and all the previous speakers. Pleasure to be here and listening to everybody. My name is Victor Villegas. I am Broadband and Digital Technologies Adoption Coordinator at Oregon State University, also part of Oregon State Extension Service. Go Beavs, indeed. I'm also the chair for Oregon Broadband Equity Coalition, which is pulling together people from urban and rural multiple sectors, cities, nonprofits, education, libraries, you name it. And I disagree that this is insurmountable, because I'm seeing that we are surmounting our differences by coming together around our commonalities. And what everyone in this coalition is working on is digital equity, whether you're rural, whether you're urban, having access to digital technologies, to broadband, to education, to healthcare, to emergency services. That is what is bringing us together, right? A lot of what I've heard has been upon the political divide, not necessarily an urban rural divide. And yes, some of that is dependent on political, but there's a technological divide. There's a socioeconomic divide. There is an age gap. There is multiple divides, and we can't just think of one particular divide as being the only thing that is keeping us from this urban rural divide. So we have to think of it in complete together. What is our commonalities? We need each other, as one of the other speakers said. And what can we do to bridge those divides? I believe we can, because I see it every day. This is my daily work, is bridging that divide. And I encourage other folks to join us in that endeavor. And I will finish there.
All right. The speaker is thanked. Hands for the speaker. We'll have one more affirmative and one more in the negative. For affirmative, I'm going to Matt McCaw. He is in line to speak. And so, Matt, you have up to 3 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I realize I spoke earlier, but I was asked to come back on and kind of finish up. There's been a lot of great conversation tonight, and we've heard a lot of really positive things about listening and understanding. And I think all of us agree on those things. There is a divide. We all know it. Anybody who lives in Oregon knows that the Portland metro area is a world apart from Burns, Oregon, or any other Eastern Oregon county. So listening, understanding, these are all positives. But we do have real differences. We do have real fundamental different policies and governance that we want for our communities. And those are things that are not solved by just listening. We need actual policy outcomes that match our values and match what we want for our communities. So the last affirmative speaker, she mentioned something about gun control. And this really gets to the crux of why the Greater Idaho movement exists, is because what we have in the state of Oregon is state level government that is one size fits all. So if the urban areas have more people and vote something in, it gets applied to the entire state. That causes conflict because we are such different people and need such different things and want such different things. So we need to find a solution to not have one size fits all policy, to not have a culture that's very different than ours, that lives hundreds of miles away, forcing policy that makes sense for them, that doesn't make sense for the rest of us. And we do have those political tools. We can use the tools that we have to get better governance, to lower conflict, lower tension, and that's what our movement's all about. So I would just encourage people to continue to listen and understand, but also understand that the differences are real. And if we cannot address those differences in meaningful ways that are tolerable to the people that live there, we're going to continue to have conflict instead of peace.
The speaker is thanked. Hands for our speaker. Susan Bird. Susan, speaking in the negative, you have up to 3 minutes.
Sorry, finding my buttons. Yeah, I'm a rare breed. I'm a 4th generation Oregonian, which means the 5th generation was the pioneer in 1846. He owned the first sawmill in Oregon on the Pudding River in Marion County. It flooded out 2 years in a row, and so he realized that wasn't such a good idea. And being flexible, I think, is part of what's defined my family in Oregon. My father always said, as a World War II vet,
that you don't have to understand people, but you do have to accept them. I enjoy the diverse points of view in Oregon. Even if I don't agree or understand, I can accept them. And I value tolerance as an integral part of our democracy. I have recently, and by that I mean the last 5 years, begun to participate more in my local and state government because of things that I saw. And I live in eastern Umatilla County. I have a ranch. I've been in cattle, wheat, hay, and timber for the last 25 years. I've also worked in education and in healthcare. And so I started attending my county commissioner meetings because I don't live, I'm about 8 miles from the nearest town, if you could call it that. And I also discovered this thing called OLIS on the internet. I have to use Starlink because, as the guy in Oregon State was saying, there is a internet problem here. But you can go to our Oregon State Legislature from anywhere in this state and watch those meetings live. And you can always submit public comment. And you can also sign up to give it just like we're doing here tonight. You can speak in person if you want, or you can submit written comment. They are an incredible body of diverse individuals from all over this state that work very hard together to figure out issues. And I've been really, really impressed with what I'm seeing over there. And because I've been here so many generations, I do not want to see Oregon change. We are diverse geographically, and we're diverse in our people, and I'd like to see it stay that way.
Yeah, the speaker is thanked. Hands for our speaker. All right, we are going to move to one of the best parts of the debate, and that is our debrief. What did you learn? And or what did you enjoy? So the chat is open now. Thank you, Emily. You're right on top of things as usual. So you can type in the chat what you learned, what you enjoyed. This is not the time to make a speech or to say, you know, I learned that the other side is stupid or, you know, any of that. But what we do is we simply put those in, but we also say it. So if you want to say it, put up your Zoom hand. To say a sentence or say, not a big speech, but just a, you know, a sentence or something. What did you learn or what did you enjoy? And I'll start with, is it Sen, Janine Solomon? Go ahead. What did you learn or enjoy?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm a senator from Washington County. So I appreciate Elizabeth inviting me here tonight. So brief, if I could just give a very quick example. I really appreciate it. I was very nervous about the debate type, you know, the word, and I thought, what is this going to be? But this is a very respectful conversation, and I really appreciate that. So I just wanted to say what I've learned is this needs to happen more. And I want you to know that there is very good examples of our legislature working together. The majority of our bills do come out in a bipartisan fashion. Look at water issues of Representative Helm and Representative Owens from 2 very different parts of the state. And I just wanted, yeah, so I'm sorry, I tried to get into the queue earlier.
Okay. All right, thank you. Philip, what did you learn or what did you enjoy?
Yes, I am in the negative towards the proposition. And what I learned is that while I understand the passion for Greater Idaho, it's a very simple solution. Split the state and everybody's happy. It's more complex. And we need dialogue on that before anything happens. I don't know legally what's involved in just splitting a state. You know, maybe West Virginia did it in 1836, but so in other words, okay, enough said.
Thank you. Gary, what did you learn or enjoy? Can you unmute?
Yep. Thank
There
you.
you go.
I'm Gary Scharf. I'm part of the team that put this program together among the Braver Angels. And the main lesson I'm taking away from this, which is really encouraging to me, is that number one, everyone who is here seems to have respect for one another and is committed to finding and has in common the desire to make this problem go away. And it means that there's a choice that people are making between attacking people on the other side or trying to find common ground. And I'm heartened by the fact that people really want that. And I'm just wondering, is there an educational piece that could happen to cross the divide so that people could understand each other better?
Thank you. Raise your Zoom hand if you have something you learned or enjoyed. Victor.
Thank you. So just the fact that we're here talking gives me hope and encourages my belief in that, yes, this can be surmounted. So this is an example of what we are doing now, what we need to do in the future and continue. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? What did you learn or enjoy? Great. All right. And thank you for all the things that you put in the chat as well. That's super interesting. All right. So the next thing I want to do, we have a couple of great announcements and a special word from Luke, and then we're going to play a song for you and call it a night. So Luke, what are you doing involved in Braver Angels? Talk to us for a minute.
Yeah, I've gotten involved in Braver Angels a couple of years ago, and we got an alliance, which is like a chapter, kicked off the ground in the southern Willamette Valley here. And it's, for me, a very exciting opportunity to help build those bridges of understanding that so many people on the Zoom today talked about us needing, because really I see that as the reconciliation that can bring us together. It's a better sense of understanding and appreciation for one another. And so if you also feel called to that mission or some other way to get involved in Braver Angels, please do become a member. It gives you the option to start a local alliance yourself or join in an alliance. It's only $1 a month, and there's all kinds of trainings and just incredible things Braver Angels is doing. It's almost unbelievable how many things. So please do fill the call, sign up online, become a member, and join this movement.
Thank you very much. So in the chat, you saw you can become a member. There's a link there. If you enjoy this debate and you'd like to work with us behind the scenes, we have opportunities for you to learn how to become a whip, like our wonderful whips tonight, or a Zoom manager like Emily is, or a chair like what I did tonight. We're constantly training you to do all these things, and we would love to have you along. So you can contact us there. Also, there are, you can contact the Alliance, and we're going to have a booth at the Washington County Fair. That's pretty cool. And also, we're going to ask you to click on a link for an evaluation. So if you look in your chat right now, there's a link for the evaluation. There's also, if you want to just point your phone at the QR code, then you can have it on your phone. Feedback is really important to us, and our programs are shaped by the feedback we get. So please do not put it off. Click on it, either open it on your laptop or open it on your phone, and then just do it as soon as we finish here. I'm not going to sit here and watch you do it, but it really, really does help us, and will shape the debates in the future. So I want to give a personal word and say I've lived in Oregon for 30 years. And I love living in Oregon so much, and I love Braver Angels. So to have Braver Angels Oregon be so vital in doing such important work really makes me happy. So some of us will be going to Kenosha, Wisconsin in a couple weeks for the national convention. And if you're going, I will see you there. And we will be setting some national policy and getting some more training and come back and be even more involved. So always happy to see all of you on the next thing. You can reach me through the debates. What is the debates email, Emily? It's debates@braverangels.org. I am pretty sure. Debates
Yeah, it
Braver
is.
Angels.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can email there, and that will get to me if you want to talk. So we're going to end now with a song by Ben Karen. We have had 2 Bravery Angels songwriting contests. We had one in 2020 and one last year. And last year, Ben's song was one of the top songs. And we sang it together at the convention. And so I'm always singing along harmony, but I will mute while we do that. And so we're sending you out with this song tonight. Thank you so much for coming. You all did a wonderful job. It was a fantastic debate. Good for you. Good night. We'll see you again soon.
Tell me, if we win this war, will we know the flag we're fighting for? Will we know the cost and whose reward will we? Tell me, what does winning mean? Will we have the world we always dreamed? Will we recognize the side of peace? Will we? And I know we're not the sins of our fathers, nor are we the broken hearts of our mothers. I know we can change the path, reclaim our last good chance to save our lives when we rise. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Call in your angels, the moment has come. Bury your pitchforks, your torches and drums.
The world we want for our daughters and sons will not be won at the end of a gun.
The time's upon us, my neighbors and friends. Tell a new story and bring to an end
all of this madness and mass discontent. But we're the ones who ascend.
We are the ones we've been waiting for, and we can't stand to wait no more. We are united with open arms and eyes. Together we will rise. Make way for youth, they're already prepared. Courage and truth, they are already theirs.
Answers within them will soon come to bear. All that they need is to be made aware.
It's time to move, it's a time for rebirth. It's time to prove what humanity's worth.
Those who will last must now be seated first, for they're the ones who'll inherit the earth.
We are the ones we are, and we can't stand to wait no more. We are united with open arms and eyes. Together we will rise. We will not ask for permission. We are the answer that's given.
We are the ones who will return. We are the hope of the living.
We are the ones who we've been waiting for, and we can't stand to wait no more. We are united with open arms and eyes. Together we will rise. We are the ones we've been waiting for, and we can't stand to wait no more. We are united with open arms and eyes. Together we will